Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Rain pressed softly against the tall dining room windows of the Crowne house, tracing slow paths down the glass as if time itself had grown tired. 11-year-old Leonard Crowne sat upright at the long walnut table, carefully aligning his fork beside his plate after every bite. Precision calmed him. Order meant nothing unexpected could happen. His mother smiled at him often that evening, more than usual, asking about school assignments she normally forgot to remember. She even corrected his collar twice, although it was already straight. The air held a strange gentleness, a fragile politeness that made the house feel like a place someone was about to leave rather than live in. His father, Arthur Crowne, barely noticed. Blueprints were spread beside his dinner plate, and he continued calculating measurements between mouthfuls, pencil-tapping porcelain whenever an equation failed to satisfy him. Leonard watched the pencil more than the rain. His father's attention had always belonged to machines, not people, but tonight his mother seemed to be studying Leonard as if memorizing him. She asked him what he wanted to become when he grew older. The question irritated him, not because he lacked ambition, but because it implied a future he assumed would remain unchanged. He answered simply that he would build things that never broke. She nodded, but her eyes carried a sadness too large for the conversation. Later that night, Leonard heard the front door close softly. Not a slam, not anger, a careful closing. He waited for footsteps to return. They never did. Morning did not bring panic. It brought quiet. Arthur stood in the kitchen holding a folded note so long the paper bent into his fingers. He did not shout. He did not cry. Something inside him collapsed silently, and Leonard saw in real time how a person could become hollow without dying. The house lost sound from that day forward. Meals became mechanical. Conversation became functional. Affection disappeared as if it had been a childish habit they both agreed to outgrow. Leonard adapted with frightening efficiency. He cleaned his own room, ironed his uniforms, scheduled his homework to the minute. Emotions were variables, unreliable and unnecessary. By the end of the year, he stopped expecting anyone to ask how his day had been. He preferred it. Dependence was now a design flaw he intended to remove from himself permanently. Years passed and discipline hardened into identity. Teachers praised his composure. Classmates avoided him. He never fought, never joked, never confessed uncertainty. His closest relationship was with certainty itself. At 16, he began coding programs late into the night, not because he enjoyed computers, but because computers behaved predictably. They did exactly what they were told. They never left. Arthur watched from a distance, recognizing too late the reflection of his own ruin forming inside his son. He tried occasionally to reconnect, awkward attempts at shared dinners, questions about school, but Leonard answered efficiently and ended conversations politely before they could become emotional. The boy had already decided, attachment caused collapse. By university, Leonard had become legend rather than student. He slept 4 hours a night, consumed caffeine instead of meals, and built algorithms that solved complex logistical problems corporations had struggled with for years. Investors noticed before classmates did. He spoke in presentations without enthusiasm, describing revolutionary systems as if reading assembly instructions. People mistook his detachment for genius. In truth, it was fear refined into professionalism. Dominic Pierce met him during a late-night systems competition where participants worked 48 hours without rest. Dominic was the opposite of Leonard, expressive, argumentative, human, yet he recognized brilliance immediately. Where others admired Leonard, Dominic challenged him, asking why he designed efficiency models but ignored human unpredictability. Leonard replied simply, people were the only unreliable component worth minimizing. Instead of offense, Dominic laughed. That laugh became the first consistent sound in Leonard's adult life. They built a startup together in a borrowed office above a closed bookstore. While Dominic negotiated investors, Leonard built architecture, not software, but structures of control. Their platform optimized supply chains so precisely that corporations reduced waste by nearly half. Money followed in overwhelming quantities. Within 6 years the company became a global technology empire. Success changed Dominic. It changed employees. It did not change Leonard. He moved into a glass mansion overlooking the city, chosen specifically because nothing in it carried history. White walls, steel railings, automated lighting, no photographs, no softness, He owned priceless art but displayed none of it. The house resembled a high-end laboratory more than a home, and he preferred it that way. A residence should serve a function, shelter, nothing more. Women attempted entry into his life constantly. Socialites, executives, journalists, opportunists. Leonard handled each interaction identically. Polite distance, short responses, no encouragement. Rumors spread quickly. The billionaire founder who had never dated, never been seen holding hands, never stayed in the same room longer than necessary with anyone seeking intimacy. Some assumed scandal. Others assumed secret relationships. The truth was simpler. He felt safer alone. Arthur, aging quietly in a smaller suburban house, visited rarely. When he did, he wandered the sterile mansion with visible discomfort, touching surfaces as though hoping warmth might appear. He once asked Leonard why he owned a dining table large enough for 12 yet never invited anyone to sit at it. Leonard answered without hesitation. It came with the house. Years of relentless work passed until his body finally began negotiating terms his mind refused to acknowledge. Persistent headaches, sleeplessness, and a tight pressure in his chest he dismissed as inconvenience. During a corporate meeting he paused mid-sentence, vision narrowing momentarily before clarity returned. No one noticed except Dominic. Dominic scheduled a medical examination under the pretense of executive health compliance. Leonard objected but attended out of efficiency. He expected routine results. Instead, Dr. Helena Strauss studied his tests in prolonged silence that irritated him more than any diagnosis could. She explained his heart was not failing yet, but it was approaching irreversible damage. Extreme stress, malnutrition, and sleep deprivation were creating measurable deterioration. If unchanged, his life expectancy would shorten drastically within a decade. Leonard asked for medication. She refused. What he required was lifestyle reconstruction, real food, rest, and human regulation of his routine. He thanked her, left, and returned directly to work. But that night, alone in the silent mansion, he experienced something unfamiliar, not fear of death, but irritation at losing control over his own body. For the first time in years, efficiency had turned against him. The city continued moving with its usual indifference the night Leonard returned from the hospital. Traffic lights changed for strangers, conversations drifted from balconies, music leaked faintly through distant windows, all evidence that life persisted without consulting him. He stood inside his silent house and noticed for the first time that silence was not calm. It was pressure, the kind that expanded when nothing interrupted it. He opened his laptop and attempted to resume work, but the numbers resisted focus. His pulse remained faintly audible in his ears, a steady reminder of the doctor's words. Not dying yet. Approaching damage. The phrase irritated him because it was imprecise. It described probability instead of certainty. He preferred problems he could solve, not ones requiring adjustment. The next morning Dominic arrived without warning carrying 2 coffees and a folder Leonard immediately recognized as medical paperwork. Dominic placed it on the glass table deliberately, then sat without invitation. He didn't speak for a full minute, which Leonard understood as intentional provocation. Eventually Dominic stated that continuing like this would end the company before competition ever could, because its architect was actively dismantling himself. Leonard dismissed the dramatics, claiming efficiency demanded sacrifice. Dominic disagreed calmly. Sacrifice implied purpose. This was avoidance. The word lingered in the room long after Dominic left, echoing louder than any argument could. Later that day, Leonard attempted to resume his routine precisely as before. Meetings, contracts, expansion projections. Yet concentration fractured repeatedly, not from pain but from distraction. He noticed minor physical limitations he had previously ignored, stiffness in his hands, slower reaction to fatigue, a subtle tremor when caffeine wore off. Irritating imperfections. He scheduled longer work hours to compensate, which only amplified them. By evening he realized the doctor had not threatened his productivity. She had exposed its dependency on a body he had treated as secondary equipment. For the first time, control required change rather than resistance. He visited his father that weekend, an action so rare Arthur opened the door with visible confusion before recognition softened his expression. The smaller house smelled faintly of machine oil and old paper. Arthur had been restoring antique radios, precise devices from an era where signals were tangible. They spoke cautiously at first, like colleagues uncertain of familiarity. Arthur eventually asked why Leonard looked exhausted despite apparent success. Leonard answered factually, medical recommendation to adjust habits. Arthur listened longer than necessary, then simply said a person could survive on discipline but not live on it. The statement annoyed Leonard because it lacked technical meaning yet felt accurate. Before leaving, Leonard noticed a shelf of journals his father had begun writing in recent years. Arthur mentioned they helped organize thoughts. Leonard found the concept inefficient yet strangely compelling, recording unoptimized human reflections. He did not read them, but he noted their existence. Evidence that even the man who had retreated into silence had eventually needed expression. The visit unsettled Leonard more than the diagnosis had. Weeks passed. Leonard implemented mechanical improvements, scheduled sleep alarms, reduced caffeine intake, automated reminders to eat prepared meals delivered by catering services. None worked. He forgot to follow the reminders, ignored the food, and overrode the alarms. Efficiency failed when the operator rejected participation. Dr. Strauss reviewed his follow-up results and explained that compliance could not be outsourced. He required engagement, not delegation. She suggested a monitored dietary structure managed by a professional rather than disposable services. Leonard declined immediately. Consistency required independence. That night he attempted to cook for himself using online instructions. The attempt produced smoke, a ruined pan, and a kitchen smelling like burned oil for hours. He ordered takeout afterward and left it unopened on the counter while returning to work. The untouched meal remained there until morning, when he threw it away without remembering doing so. Dominic's patience ended a few days later during a board meeting when Leonard paused mid-presentation again, briefly losing his train of thought. The interruption lasted seconds but destabilized the room. Investors noticed what employees had begun to fear. Afterward, Dominic confronted him privately, not as COO but as the only person permitted honesty. He explained that leadership required continuity, and continuity required survival. The company's future depended on the one variable Leonard refused to manage: himself. Leonard did not respond immediately. Instead he went home early, an unprecedented decision, and stood inside the quiet kitchen staring at its unused perfection. Stainless steel appliances reflected a man who had mastered systems but not existence. The realization was not emotional, it was structural. His current design could not sustain long-term operation. The following appointment with Dr. Strauss ended differently. When she repeated that nutrition and regulated routine were non-negotiable, Leonard asked for the most efficient implementation available. She recommended a private living culinary specialist, someone who would control preparation and enforce schedule rather than rely on his memory. He resisted for several minutes, calculating intrusion against longevity. Privacy held value, but functionality held more. Eventually he asked for a short list of candidates. He returned home with a folder and placed it unopened on the counter. Hiring someone into his personal space meant introducing unpredictability, the element he had eliminated since childhood. Hours passed before he finally opened it. Profiles, certifications, references, variables attempting to quantify a human presence. He closed the folder again without choosing. The decision would alter more than routine. It would alter equilibrium. For the first time since the night his mother left, Leonard understood that maintaining isolation now required more effort than allowing interruption. And effort, to him, was the clearest signal something was inefficient. He did not choose immediately. The folder remained on the kitchen counter for 2 full days, untouched except for the shifting light that crossed it from sunrise to evening. Leonard passed it repeatedly, aware of it without looking at it, the way a person notices a ticking clock only after deciding they dislike the sound. On the 3rd night, insomnia refused negotiation. At 2:13 a.m., he opened the file again and began reviewing candidates with the same precision he used when acquiring companies. Most profiles attempted to impress: awards, celebrity clients, extravagant culinary philosophies written as performance rather than discipline. He dismissed them quickly. He required consistency, not artistry. One profile read differently: Myra Solon, clinical nutrition certification alongside classical culinary training. Experience working with recovery patients and long-term fatigue disorders. Personal note: food should stabilize before it impresses. No exaggeration. No performance. Only purpose. He scheduled the interview for the next afternoon. She arrived exactly on time, not early enough to appear eager nor late enough to appear careless. Instead of studying the architecture like visitors usually did, she studied him. Not rudely, clinically. Leonard noticed immediately. She asked practical questions first: schedule, sleep patterns, work hours, intolerance to flavors. She did not comment on wealth, decor, or staff. When he explained he required minimal conversation, she agreed without offense. When he stated privacy was non-negotiable, she nodded once and wrote it down. The meeting ended in under 10 minutes. As she stood to leave, she added calmly that she accepted only if he intended compliance, not convenience. No one had ever declined him preemptively. He hired her before she reached the elevator. The following morning the house smelled different. Not rich, not decorative, grounded. Warm grain and citrus. Leonard paused at the staircase, confused by a sensation he couldn't categorize: anticipation. Breakfast waited on the table, portioned precisely with a note listing nutritional function rather than flavor description. He ate while reading reports and noticed halfway through that he had finished the entire plate without distraction. Myra appeared only to collect dishes and confirm the next mealtime. No conversation. No performance. Just structure. Days formed a pattern. Meals arrived exactly when scheduled regardless of meetings. If he skipped one, the next appeared beside his laptop instead of the dining table. When he ignored it, she waited silently until he acknowledged it. Not confrontational. Immovable. His productivity improved measurably within a week, which he respected. Efficiency justified presence. By the second week he noticed something else. The house no longer sounded empty. Not noisy, alive. Soft music sometimes played in the kitchen during preparation. Not for him. For the work. He began passing through the space under the pretense of retrieving water. She did not initiate conversation, but when he asked a direct question she answered without embellishment. Cooking, she explained once, was maintenance for people who forgot they were physical. One evening a storm cut power across the district. Backup generators kept the lights dim but removed the usual mechanical hum of the house. The quiet changed texture, softer, human. Myra lit candles in the kitchen so she could continue preparing dinner rather than postpone routine. Leonard remained longer than necessary, watching unfamiliar movements, deliberate, calm, unhurried. Work done for care rather than output. Without planning to, he admitted he preferred predictable systems because people eventually leave them. She didn't react immediately. Then she said people also leave systems, just slower. The statement stayed with him long after the electricity returned. Routine deepened into habit. He began sitting at the table instead of eating while working. Conversation remained minimal but natural, observations about schedule adjustments, occasional questions about preparation methods. He found learning the logic behind meals strangely satisfying. Cause and effect he could understand. One night she allowed him to assist, guiding rather than instructing. He followed directions precisely, frustrated when human coordination failed mathematical expectation. She told him precision improves when you stop trying to win against the task. He slept fully that night for the first time in years. Dominic noticed immediately during meetings. Focus sharper. Irritability reduced. When he jokingly asked what had changed, Leonard simply said structure had improved. Dominic visited later and, seeing someone else in the house, realized change had reached places numbers could not measure. He left without comment but with visible relief. Weeks passed, and absence of tension became its own unfamiliar tension. Leonard began waiting for disruptions that did not come. Instead, small consistencies accumulated, meals shared occasionally, short discussions extending beyond function. He learned she once cared for her father through illness, which shaped her belief that nourishment is stability, not luxury. She learned he planned everything because unpredictability once removed stability permanently. Neither expanded further. Understanding did not require details. The next power outage came months later, deeper into winter. This time the generators failed completely. The house surrendered to darkness and cold starlight through glass walls. They remained in the kitchen near the fireplace rather than retreat separately. Silence held weight but not discomfort. Leonard admitted he had structured his entire life to avoid depending on someone who could disappear. The words arrived before permission. Myra answered quietly that connection always risks absence, but isolation guarantees it. He understood the logic instantly, and feared it more than any diagnosis. The following morning he returned to strict distance. Conversations shortened. Meals eaten alone again. She did not confront him, only maintained routine. The shift lasted several days until she requested a private conversation and explained she could not become part of a life built entirely around avoidance. She would finish the week and leave. He allowed it. Control demanded it. Her final day left the house quieter than it had ever been, because now he understood the difference. A note remained on the counter: "You learned to function better. Now learn to live." For 3 nights he worked continuously, attempting to restore normalcy. Productivity returned, but clarity did not. He visited his father again, this time opening the journals he once ignored. They contained reflections Arthur wrote after his wife left, not anger, but regret for teaching his son strength without teaching him connection. Leonard read until dawn, recognizing the same future forming. He went home and attempted cooking alone using what he remembered. Imperfect. Uneven. Human. He packed the result and drove to the small apartment listed in her employment file. When she opened the door, he explained he was afraid, not of loss, but of needing someone and surviving anyway. He asked if uncertainty could be practiced like discipline. She tasted the meal before answering yes. Months later, the glass house changed gradually, not decorated extravagantly, but lived in. Music existed without purpose. The large dining table gained regular use. Work remained important, but not singular. Leonard discovered that vulnerability did not remove structure, it added meaning to it. For the first time in his life, absence no longer defined safety. Presence did. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.